You've probably heard it a million times. The middle class has been completely priced out of housing. It's impossible to buy a home anymore unless you're wealthy. The dream of homeownership is dead. And honestly, when you look at the headlines and the home prices in your city, it's easy to believe that's absolutely true. But here's the thing, like most big statements about the economy, this one is both true and not true at the same time. Today, we're going to dig into what's actually happening with middle-class housing around the world, why it feels impossible, where it really is impossible, and where it's still happening every single day. No hype, no doom and gloom, just the real picture. Let's get into it. Why this belief exists. First, let's talk about why this belief exists, because it's not coming from nowhere. The frustration is absolutely real, and the numbers back it up in many places around the world. According to research tracking wealthy economies, satisfaction with affordable housing has plunged dramatically. In 2024, only 43% of people in wealthy countries were satisfied with the availability of good affordable housing in their areas, compared to 50% in the rest of the world. That's a stunning reversal from just a few years ago when wealthy nations consistently rated higher. In major cities across North America, Europe, Australia, and parts of Asia, housing costs have climbed faster than wages for years. Home prices in places like Sydney, Vancouver, Toronto, and London have reached levels that previous generations would have found unthinkable. A recent international study found that Hong Kong has a median multiple of 14.4, meaning typical homes cost more than 14 times the median household income. Sydney follows at 13.8, Vancouver at 11.8, and San Jose at 12.1. These aren't slight affordability challenges, these are genuine crises. So the frustration you're feeling is backed by real data from around the world. Home prices have climbed faster than wages in most developed countries. Interest rates, while they've come down from their peak in some places, are still significantly higher than they were a few years ago. The inventory of affordable starter homes is extremely limited almost everywhere. These are facts, not feelings. This is why the phrase "priced out" resonates so strongly with people across continents. For millions of people, especially in expensive cities worldwide, it genuinely feels like the door to homeownership has slammed shut. And for some people in some places, that's exactly what's happened. Where it's absolutely true. Let's be completely honest about where this is absolutely true, because denying the problem doesn't help anyone. In major cities around the world, the middle class has been severely squeezed out of homeownership. In cities like Sydney, Vancouver, Toronto, London, Singapore, and many others, housing affordability has reached crisis levels. Research shows that housing costs in places like Vancouver and Toronto can consume 80 to 100% of median household income. In Vancouver, homeowners now spend over 92% of their household income on ownership costs, while in Toronto it's around 68%. Both are far above what experts consider affordable, which is 30% of income. When you're spending more than half your income just to keep a roof over your head, you're not living comfortably, you're barely surviving. But it's not just the usual expensive cities anymore. The affordability crisis has spread to places that used to be escape routes for people priced out of major metros. Cities that were once affordable alternatives are now facing their own housing crises. Between 2019 and 2023, Canada's largest cities lost nearly 275,000 people to smaller markets as families fled unaffordable urban cores. But even those smaller cities are seeing prices climb. The pattern is similar in Australia, the United Kingdom, and parts of Europe. The problem is real, it's spreading, and it's affecting people who never thought they'd struggle with housing costs. When teachers, nurses, and other essential workers cannot afford to live in the communities they serve, the entire foundation of society weakens. Where it's not entirely true. But here's where the story gets more complicated, and this is important. While some middle-class people have been priced out, others are still buying homes and building wealth through homeownership every single day. The reality is much more nuanced than the simple narrative of complete collapse. In many countries, homeownership rates among middle-income households haven't collapsed the way the headlines suggest. People are finding ways to make it work, sometimes by moving to less expensive cities, sometimes by saving longer, sometimes by getting creative with co-buying arrangements or government assistance programs. The global middle class continues to grow, with over 100 million people expected to join the consumer class worldwide in 2025, many of whom will eventually become homeowners. There are still places around the world where middle-class families are successfully buying homes without bankrupting themselves. In certain regions and secondary cities, housing remains relatively affordable compared to major metros. Cities that aren't global financial centers or tech hubs often maintain more reasonable price-to-income ratios. Research shows that while 95 major housing markets were analyzed globally, affordability varies dramatically. Pittsburgh in the United States, for example, has maintained a median multiple of 3.2 for 5 consecutive years, which falls into the moderately unaffordable category but is still far far better than Hong Kong's 14.4 or Sydney's 13.8. Other relatively affordable markets exist in various countries, proving that geography now determines whether homeownership is possible more than almost any other factor. Here's a real example that might surprise you. Middle-class households in many countries have built substantial wealth through homeownership over the past decade. Research shows that middle-class households collectively built over $2 trillion in housing wealth over the past 10 years, accounting for about 26% of overall housing wealth gains during that period. These aren't wealthy people. They're solidly middle-class, working hard, and they made homeownership happen. Their story isn't unique. Yes, it's harder than it should be. Yes, it requires more sacrifice than previous generations faced, but it's still possible for many people in many places. The nuanced truth. So what's the real truth here? It's complicated, and that's frustrating because we want simple answers. The truth is that the middle class hasn't been completely priced out everywhere, but they have been priced out in many high-cost cities, and they're struggling almost everywhere. It depends entirely on where you live, what you do for work, and how much you've been able to save. If you're trying to buy in Sydney, Vancouver, London, or San Francisco, you might genuinely be priced out unless you're in a high-earning profession. If you're in a smaller city or a region with lower costs, you probably still have real options, though they're getting harder to reach every year. The bigger issue is that it's gotten dramatically harder for everyone, almost everywhere. The path to homeownership has become much steeper and much narrower globally. In most wealthy economies, you need to earn more, save longer, and often make bigger sacrifices than your parents did to achieve the same goal. Research tracking housing markets worldwide shows that the price-to-income ratio has increased significantly across most developed nations. What used to cost 3 to 4 times your annual income now costs 5, 7, or even 10 times that amount in many places. The game hasn't ended, but the rules have changed fundamentally. And here's something that doesn't get talked about enough. For middle-class homeowners who managed to buy in the last decade, especially in growing markets, housing wealth has increased dramatically. This is creating a strange situation where homeownership is simultaneously creating significant wealth for people already in the market while becoming increasingly unreachable for those trying to enter. It's a cycle where success breeds more success for some, while others find themselves permanently locked out. This growing divide between homeowners and renters is reshaping the entire structure of the middle class in many countries. What this means for you, if you're middle class and worried about housing, here's what you need to know. First, don't let anyone tell you that it's impossible everywhere, because that's simply not true. But also don't let anyone minimize your struggle if you're in an expensive city, because that struggle is real and backed by data from around the world. Your experience is valid even if it's not universal. Second, location matters more than it ever has before. If homeownership is important to you and your current city has priced you out, it might be worth considering whether a move to a more affordable area aligns with your career and life goals. Thousands of families across multiple countries are making that choice. It's not fair that you might have to move to achieve what previous generations got in their hometown, but it's a real option that's working for many people. Third, if you're determined to stay in an expensive area, you might need to redefine what homeownership looks like. It might mean a smaller home, a longer commute, or a longer timeline to save. It might mean using first-time buyer programs where they exist, co-buying with family members, or considering an apartment instead of a house with a yard. These aren't perfect solutions, but they're how people around the world are making it work. And fourth, if you're currently priced out, that doesn't mean you failed. The system has changed in fundamental ways, not you. Renting is not throwing money away, especially if buying would stretch you so thin that one emergency could destroy your finances. Sometimes renting is genuinely the smart choice, and there's no shame in that. Balanced conclusion. Here's the bottom line. The statement, "the middle class was priced out of housing," is true for millions of people in expensive cities around the world and false for millions of others in more affordable regions. It's true that it's gotten much harder almost everywhere, and false that it's become impossible everywhere. Both realities exist at the same time across different cities and countries. The middle class hasn't been completely priced out globally, but they've been squeezed hard in most wealthy economies, and in many major cities, they've been pushed to the breaking point or beyond. The real conversation we should be having isn't whether the middle class has been priced out. It's about why housing has become so unaffordable in so many places around the world, what we can do about it, and how we can make sure the next generation has better options. Because right now, the data shows a troubling trend across multiple continents. If countries don't build more housing, reform restrictive zoning laws, and address the supply shortage, the problem will only get worse. More cities will join the list of places where middle-class families simply cannot afford to live. That's the future many countries are heading toward if nothing changes. If this video gave you a clearer picture of what's really happening with middle-class housing around the world, hit that subscribe button. We break down economic myths and give you the real story. No hype, no agenda, just facts and context that apply to people everywhere. Drop a comment comment and let me know, where are you trying to buy and what's your biggest challenge? Are you in a city where it feels impossible, or have you found a way to make it work? I read every comment, and your experiences from around the world help shape future videos. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.